Sound, how to go sound now? Where's the sound? Computer sound, share computer sound. Okay. I think
take an important step in our.
Whoa, 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 The world's best instrument was our goal. We thought that it was real, but what did we know? Search inside your heart, then you will find the instrument you seek is your human right.
We are all born free to dream, to build an equal world for you and me. We gotta fight to make this world suffer free, because we are all one in reality.
This fantasy will become a reality when the children of the world can play happy and free.
This is the bridge you need to cross, because it will lead to the land of laughter, happiness and felicity.
There are children on this earth who are all alone. Society ignores them, they are forgotten. They work all night and day, work to the bone. We need to protect them.
Consider this, we all have life in common. All people on earth walk under the same sun. Here is a lesson we gotta take in. I am you and you are me. Don't judge me because I am different to you. Don't judge me for the way I speak or masking you. Open your mind, look beyond these things, for we are all the same underneath our skin. Childhood is a treasure to be careful. Each boy and girl's a future that's just round the corner. It's also a thing of beauty, but it's also fragile. The first thing that we should always try for rescue. All of us have the right to an education, so we can reach our goals in life and our ambitions. Books are just like paper and plays, have you heard? You get to know the world with them and fly like a bird.
Think about it, you have the right to an angel, flesh and blood, not a number. A human being that's growing, getting stronger and stronger. You're someone, not a something, not a number. Walk without chains, find your identity, cause you will always be unique.
Consider this, we all have life in common. All people on earth walk under the same sun. Here is a lesson we gotta take in. I am you and you are me. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
you ever had this dream, one where we can all be free, treated equally? Did you ever wish for that day, one where hatred melts away and love paves the
I can't now.
way? Know that you're not alone, your vision's my own. Just listen to these words and know that these are human rights, and they're free. So listen carefully, and for you and me. Yeah. Did you know you got a right to life? Did you know you have got a right to learn? Did you know you can stand for your rights? So join in my song tonight. And it all starts with you and me, from the young, the old, the wild and free. When our nations sing this melody, when we wave our flags in harmony, and when we all can live as one, and the world feels a brighter sun, we can turn this dream into reality. Human rights begin with you and me. Every place is not the same, but universally, our rights never change. Everywhere you go, it shows our responsibility. It's time to help them see that no matter black or white, lost or right inside, we all deserve the right to know. So if you want to change this world, no, it's not a mystery. It starts with you and me. Did you know you got a right to life? Did you know you have got a right to learn? Did you know you can stand for your rights? So join in my song tonight. And it all starts with you and me, from the young, the old, the wild and free. When our nations sing this melody, when we wave our flags in harmony, and when we all can live as one, and the world feels a brighter sun, we can turn this dream into reality. Human rights begin with you and me. A dream, a vision. To reach these walls must all come down. We all have a reason to live, to love, to work and play. Our rights, they cannot be taken away. And it all starts with you and me, from the young, the old, the wild and free. When our nations sing this melody, when we wave our flags in harmony, and when we all can live as one, and the world feels a brighter sun, we can turn this dream into reality. You and me.
Whoa, 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 The world's best instrument was our goal. We thought that it was real, but what did we know? Search inside your heart, then you will find the instrument you seek is your human right.
We are all born free to dream, to build an equal world for you and me. We gotta fight to make this world suffer free, because we are all one in reality.
This fantasy will become a reality when the children of the world can play happy and free.
This is the bridge you need to cross, because it will lead to the land of laughter, happiness and felicity.
There are children on this earth who are all alone. Society ignores them, they are forgotten. They work all night and day, work to the bone. We need to protect them.
Consider this, we all have life in common. All people on earth walk under the same sun. Here is a lesson we gotta take in. I am you and you and me. Don't judge me because I am different to you. Don't judge me for the way I speak or masking you. Open your mind and look beyond these things, for we are all the same underneath our skin.
Childhood is a treasure to be careful. Each boy and girl's a future that's just round the corner. It's also seen a beauty, but it's also fragile. The first thing that we should always strive for rescue.
All of us have the right to an education, so we can reach our goals in life and our ambitions. Books are just like paper and planes, have you heard? You get to know the world with them and fly like a bird.
About it, you have the right to an angel, flesh and blood, not a number. A human being that's growing, getting stronger and stronger. You're someone, not a something. You're a name, not a number. Walk without chains. Find your identity, cause you will always be unique.
Consider this, we all have life in common. All people on earth walk under the same sun. Here is a lesson we gotta take in. I am you and you are me.
You're muted, Rohan.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is 5 in the morning in New Jersey, and it is 7 p.m., 7 in the evening in South Korea, Japan, and 8 p.m. in Australia. And we are all gathered in this online space from all parts of the world, north to south, east to west. And today is the Human Rights Day. We are participating in this event because we believe and value human rights. We want to protect and promote human rights in the globe. I welcome you all to this event. This live chat event is organized by the CLARETIAN team at the United Nations, New York. The team is based in New Jersey. There are 4 objectives for our presence at the UN. Our first objective is to influence the UN from our lived experience at the grassroots. Second objective is to be the voice of the voiceless and the marginalized, victimized, excluded from the grassroots. And third objective is to make our members, associates, and others to be aware of United Nations system and involve everyone in the transformation of the world. And our fourth objective is to introduce the United Nations goals, system, mechanisms, instruments to the grassroots for engagement with the United Nations. And friends, today's event, this Human Rights Day event through this live chat covers all these objectives. This is a YouTube event. Yes, we call it an event, not a show, not a talk show, because it is a live chat program, an interactive program. Although the viewers, the participants are not directly interact with the panelists or with the other participants, through chat box, we show our closeness, interrelatedness, our partnership in mission, our solidarity, and above all, our common goal of promoting and protecting the human rights in the world and in the planet. So kindly participate actively, post your comments on the topics discussed, and also post your clarifications and questions on the topics and various local, national, global issues in the chat box. The panelists will try to clarify issues and motivate and guide us towards human rights action in our own places. Now I invite Father Vincent Anastasier, the General Secretary of the Congregation for Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation, for a few words and lead us in prayer.
International Day of Human Rights, December 10, 2020. Better recovery, stand up for human rights. Next slide. Introduction to the human right today. After the Second World War, the need was felt to have a global institution to promote the peace and development of the global community. The formation of the UN on December 24th, 1945, the 24th is Claret Feast, answered this thirst. Then the world leaders decided to prepare a roadmap to guarantee the rights of every individual everywhere. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, shortly known as UDHR, that was adopted by the UN Assembly on 10th December 1948, is a fruit of this aspiration. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has inspired a number of other human rights laws and treaties throughout the world. In UDHR, the roots of all the rights can be found. The UDHR is one among the most important documents of the 20th century. The UDHR has inspired people around the world to claim their rights. It is translated into hundreds of languages and dialects from Abkhaz to Zulu. Next slide. The articles of UDHR are only values. They are not binding. Hence, the UN wanted to have a human rights instrument which would be legally binding. In making of the instrument, the USA wanted that civil and political rights were given priority, whereas the USR preferred the economic, social, and cultural rights. Since there was no agreement among them, two covenants were made. The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR, in 1966, to accommodate the demands of the USSR. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, in 1966, it was made to satisfy USA. Following these instruments, at least 14 other multilateral human rights treaties have been made. On December 20th, International Day of Human Rights is celebrated in commemoration of the adoption of UDHR and as an opportunity to make the people aware of the human rights and uphold the rights of people, and particularly the vulnerable ones. So the theme for this year is Better Recovery, Stand Up for Human Rights. It means that for the better recovery of health in the context of COVID-19, the human rights of everybody have to be promoted. So this YouTube live chat organized by clinicians working at UN aims to increase the level of understanding of human rights system and human rights instruments, to get involved in human rights action, knowing necessary elements, to commit for the protection and promotion of human rights wherever we live and serve, to build solidarity and create networking among those involved in human rights action. Now, before introducing the panelists and moderator, let us pray for some time. The world order that we look for is parabolically spoken by Prophet Isaiah, chapter 11, 6 to 8. So this is the world we want to create, a peaceful world. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with a bear. Their young will lie down together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into viper's nest. Let us pause to reflect on God's word to us. A peaceful world. Also looking at this picture for 2 seconds. Next slide. Now we shall think about what the Catholic Church is thinking about human rights. This is given in the Compendium of Social Doctrine of the Church, number 154. Human rights are to be defended not only individually, but also as a whole. Protecting them only partially would imply a kind of failure to recognize them. They correspond to the demands of human dignity and entail, in the first place, the fulfillment of the essential needs of the person in the material and spiritual spheres. Universality and indivisibility are distinctive characteristics of human rights. They are two guiding principles which at the same time demand that human rights be rooted in each culture and that their juridical profile be strengthened so as to ensure that they are fully observed. Let us pause for 2 seconds, reflecting on the teaching of the Church, universality, indivisibility, also looking at these demands of these children. Some of us know about Archbishop Oscar Romero. When you are speaking about human rights, as we are celebrating Mass, he was shot dead. Just a few minutes before he was killed on May 24th, 1980, the words he spoke are very encouraging. We know that every effort to better society, especially when injustice and sin are so ingrained, is an effort that God blesses, that God wants, that God demands of us. So these are the words of Oscar Romero, and this is the person. Next slide. Now we shall pray. As I pray, you can also pray silently. God of peace and justice, stir our hearts to create a world of peace with the due dignity and rights for the planet and the people. May we stand in solidarity with all whose rights are daily violated. Bless this day's YouTube chat that it might inspire as well as impel us to act. Amen. Now let me introduce the moderator. So this is Father Callistus Joseph, CMF, a Claretian. He originally hails from Sri Lanka, where he had experienced massive human rights violations. As a student, he had his formation in India and in the Philippines, which gave him profound experiences. He had further studied on psychology and counseling at the United States. He was the first coordinator of the Solidarity with South Sudan project, an international consortium of more than 200 religious congregations that runs Teachers Training Institute, Nursing College, Sustainable Agriculture Program, and pastoral training of the personnel in South Sudan. Currently, he is the provincial of the Claretians in Germany. So to this event of learning and commitment, we are happy that many of you have joined in YouTube from different parts of the globe. You are cordially invited to learn and to interact. As Rohan has already informed you, you can place your questions, clarifications in the chat, which will be taken to the panelists. Now I hand over this virtual space to the moderator of this event, Father Callistus Joseph. Thank you very much.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. I think we have to thank Father Vincent for this elaborate introduction and the reflection that he has shared with us to prepare us for this conversation on human rights that is organized by the Claretian team at the UN. On this 72nd anniversary of the Declaration of the Human Rights, it is appropriate that we reflect, gain new knowledge, and commit ourselves to the promotion and defense of human rights. The objective is to understand the human rights systems and the human rights instruments. And we have two people on our panel who are experts on these. And so I have the privilege of introducing them to you all. But before I introduce them, I would like to welcome all of you, our viewers in YouTube, who have joined us through the Claretian UN YouTube channel. You are most welcome to pose your questions, share your comments, share your views, and perhaps also to share your joys and difficulties in the work for human rights in places wherever you are assigned. I have now the privilege of introducing to you Budi Chiaiono. Welcome. Budi hails from Indonesia, and since 2011, he coordinates the Asia Pacific desk of the Franciscan International Organization in Geneva. He grew up in Indonesia during the time of the long reign of Suharto and got involved in student activists movements and got interest in human rights issues from that time on. Currently, he works with human rights mechanism like Universal Periodic Review, special procedures, human rights treaty bodies, and he regularly attends the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. The issues that he focuses mainly on are related to indigenous people's rights, environment and climate justice, responsibility of business on human rights, human rights defenders, and at the moment he is also the president of the International Catholic Center of Geneva. Thank you for joining us and for your willingness to enlighten our viewers today. The next panelist is Gituku. Welcome. Gitaki is the program officer of the American Jewish World Service Organization based in Kenya. He has long experience in human rights issues, especially focused on land, water, climate justice, sexual health rights, and he works in promoting grassroots community marginalized groups, in creating network and movement building of human rights defenders. He is conversant with the human rights tools and mechanisms and has the expertise on human rights issues, especially access to justice, good governance, security and protection of human rights defenders, indigenous rights, and fundamental freedoms. So we welcome you, Gitaki, also to the panel. Just to begin our conversation, I would like to invite both our panelists to share a little bit about the work that they are doing now, and then we will take up the questions that are posed by the viewers. So I would like to invite Budi first, and then Gitaki to share in short your work.
Thank you very much, Father Joseph. Greetings to everyone, greetings of peace. And I'm very thankful to Father Rohan especially, but also to the CLARETIAN family to be invited on this YouTube discussion. And it's very timely because today is the celebrations of the International Human Rights Day. So this is very timely for us to discuss about the human rights. So for me, as a person who is working for Franciscan International, we represent the Franciscan families from different religious orders and congregations within the Franciscan families at the United Nations. So Franciscan International is a human rights NGO with a very strong background of Franciscan values, using the experience of the Franciscans coming from different parts of the world. But at the same time, we are also very much inspired by the social teaching of the church. For us, we are trying to be the bridge between the people that we are serving on the ground with the decision makers at the United Nations. And at the same time, we are trying to bring the recommendations, decisions, discussions of the United Nations to be relevant with the people on the ground. Because we think that it is very important to have two-way communication between the people and the UN, as well as the UN for the people. But the work that we are doing is covering the different regions, which include the Asia Pacific, in which I'm the coordinator, but we are also covering the Africa and the Americas. And we also work on different issues, key thematic issues, such as the issue of poverty, which is very Franciscan, as well as on the issue of environment, especially on the issue of the environmental and climate justice. But at the same time, we also work on the issue of the impacts of the business on human rights. We work very closely with other faith-based and non-faith-based organizations by using different UN human rights mechanisms, both in Geneva, but also in New York. In New York, we have someone who is working to represent us in New York, and I'm very sure that the CLARETIAN in New York works very closely also with the Franciscans and other faith-based organizations. So yeah, that's a very brief about me and my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Budi. Thank you, Budi, for your kind words. Gitaki?
Thank you, Father Callistus, for the kind introduction. That's very kind of you. I wish to take this opportunity first to thank Father Rohan and Father Vincent for thinking about this and implementing.
Sure. Kita? Okay, please go on. You went offline for a moment. Please go on. Kitaki.
To be together to celebrate. I appreciate the Catholic Church and as definition of human rights defenders and who we are people who stand for basic rights and fundamental freedoms. To be a human rights defender does not take any other qualification but standing for rights, whether you are standing for your own rights alone or standing for the rights of others individually or with other people in peaceful manner. As we heard in the introduction, the process of standing for these rights and realizing those rights as human beings has not always been easy. Some of us has paid the ultimate price. We do regret that. However, as in the Mayan saying, when they buried us, they never realized we are seeds. Those who have paid the ultimate price continue motivating us to see that equity and human rights are well represented or are the core values in the society that we live in. As we pursue peace in the world, we want to extend the level of human rights education. We want to pronounce that standing for human rights is legal and is backed up in the UN Declaration for Human Rights that we celebrate and in the laws of many countries. Let us join each other in the world. Let us stand together because it is possible to have a human rights approach in the way we live in this globe. I wish to say that I believe in human dignity, and there is no time at all, there is no reason at all that it should be seen that anyone loses their dignity. People do have dignity. If you allow me, I can use the case of apartheid in South Africa. It is not that Black people gained dignity. It is the realization of some of the white people driving apartheid who realize that they have lost humanity by running a system called apartheid. What I'm trying to elaborate is that each human being everywhere in the world has dignity. Let us uphold that. I close by saying that I work as a program officer with American Jewish World Service, Kenya, where I currently work with indigenous people on environmental rights. That does not limit me to think and act on any other rights. Thank you, Callistus.
Thank you very much, Kitaki. I think to complement what you said about the dignity of human beings, in the recent encyclical of Pope Francis, we read the following quote: "Every human being has the right to live with dignity and to develop integrally. This fundamental right cannot be denied by any country. People have this right even if they are unproductive or were born with or developed limitations. This does not detract from their great dignity as human persons. A dignity based not on circumstances, but on the intrinsic worth of their being. Unless this basic principle is upheld, there will be no future either for fraternity or for the survival of humanity." I think it's a very powerful statement, but you also reminded us how costly our commitment to human rights could be, as we heard also in the prayer, and as we all have experienced, or we come to know many people who have paid their ultimate price for the work for human rights. Now, dear viewers, you are most welcome to pose your questions, but we will start this conversation by dealing with few questions that are common to both our panelists. You know, one of the important issues of our time is based on climate change. We are all becoming aware of the changes that it brings to our world, and the new generation is rising up for their rights. And I'm glad that both our panelists have great experience on climate justice. And I would like to invite both the panelists to share their approach to climate justice and what they have experienced so far in this work for climate justice. Could I begin with Kitahi? Yes.
Thank you so much. And I prefer using the terminology climate justice.
Yeah.
And when we are using the term climate justice, it is not in a vacuum. It is that we live in this world together. It does not belong only to us. It also belongs to future generations. Climate justice is a human reality. The effects of climate change has really affected people and communities in a very big way. This is an issue that we need to understand together, that we need to put efforts towards conservation, towards human survival, because we are talking about people being able to live. The effects of climate change, mostly in the global south, where we live, is compounded by other human rights issues. As I said previously, I work with indigenous peoples, hunter-gatherer communities, pastoralists, fisher folks. And these are people who live and depend with nature without doing of their own, because they really try to live with nature. Other factors have brought climate change, notwithstanding ownership of land, access to resources, and managing those resources has in many times globally been taken away from them. And I say this to demonstrate that we need a human rights approach to mitigate climate change effects. The human rights approach means that everyone should be involved in where they are, the indigenous knowledge they have, and have rights to access, have justice, so that they are part and not only seen as beneficiaries of the interventions made globally. Thank you.
Thank you. Woody, would you like to please answer?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I think as a Catholic family, we are very, very happy that in 2015, Pope Francis issued Laudato Si. So it was not by coincidence, but it was very strategic way of the Catholic Church to issue that very historical encyclic, because it was also the year when we had the discussion on climate change, which gave birth to the Paris Agreement. So it was very timely. And for us, we work with the UNFCCC. It means that the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. And we are using the human rights approach in one hand, in which the human right has to be ensured within the Paris Agreement and also its implementations. At the same time, we are very much inspired by the call of Pope Francis through Laudato Si. So while we are using the human rights approach as people of faith, we also use the Catholic social teaching, the encyclic, as our spirit, as our power, so that we can be involved not only as a human rights defenders, but also as a people of faith. So what we are trying to do is to ensure that the human right is reflected in the climate negotiation, and we were very thankful that in the preambular paragraph of the Paris Agreement, we have the reference on climate change, on human rights, and it was a big work that was done by thousands of NGOs we, the Franciscans, we were also in Paris and trying to help to negotiate during the negotiations. And now the challenge is really how to implement those Paris Agreement into something that is tangible, something that is really involving the people and respecting human rights. As Kitahi has expressed before, that we want to ensure that a human rights approach is ensured, implemented in the climate actions. And how to do it? What we are doing now is really pushing the states that they reflect the human rights approach within what they call as NDC, nationally determined contributions. This is more or less the real things, the real actions that each state is committed to ensure that the situation will improve within a measurable period. And we are trying to ask the states to see where is your climate actions that reflects the human right. We want to make sure. So that is the first thing that we are trying to do, using the mechanism of the UN, in particular the Paris Agreement, implementation of Paris Agreement and the Paris Rule Books. But at the same time, since we are working with the Human Rights Council, we are also using the different mechanisms to bring the reports on how the climate change has affected negatively to the enjoyment of human rights. So we work a lot with different NGOs, but we also work with the communities that are affected, either in Solomon Island, for example, in the Philippines, in Kiribati, in some other countries, Australia, my own country, Indonesia, so that we show to the world that climate change has impacted negatively to the enjoyments of various rights, right to life, right to education, right to food, right of the child, indigenous rights, so on and so forth. So we would like to show to the international community that what's happening with the climate change has impact on the enjoyment of human rights. And then in terms of mechanism as well, we are working now by pushing the UN Human Rights Council to create a new mechanism that is special rapporteur on climate change and human rights. It's not very easy, but we expect that next year we will have the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Climate Change. We are working on it. And we are also working at the moment in pushing the global recognitions on the right to healthy environment. Although the right to healthy environment has been recognized in different parts of the world, around 130 countries that have this right to healthy environment in either their constitutions or their legal system, but it is not yet recognized as a global recognition. So we are working on that, and we expect that next year this global recognition on right to healthy environment will be realized.
Thank you very much. I am deeply impressed by the commitment and the work that you are doing through your organizations on this issue of climate justice. Just making it easier for our viewers, what would you suggest actually at the local level that they could do? Any one of you could please answer.
Thank you. Yes, I can attempt that one.
Yeah, please.
Because yes, the declaration is universal, but how people experience rights is individual. You need to have those rights experienced by everyone and people who live as communities as such. A second body that states needs to recognize the role of people and communities towards climate change and climate justice. We have enough laws, we have enough guidelines. Now what we need is realization of those rights by rights holders. So what can be done at local level in this continent? I'm calling in from Africa.
Yeah.
We need states to start implementing and respecting those rights in a just manner. Do not assume that because people are hunter-gatherer, they live in forests, that they have no role in combating climate justice. They may have the knowledge we need to mitigate strongly. Therefore, include them, respect their ways of life. They've lived this traditionally for a long time. Do not talk development without talking human being. The human being is the first person to be respected and how they live in their environment, because we've seen hundreds of people in Kenya, in Nigeria, evicted from where they live to pave way for civilization. So the question is, what is this civilization? For who? How are those people participating in this civilization? Because we don't want development where we have structures and no people, no unity. We have seen countries go down because people don't feel included. The people don't feel the justice, and there is conflict. I'm not justifying violence. All I'm saying is that what we can do at local level is to include meaningfully the people who live in those local levels towards a solution. We go together. We would rather walk along a journey where everyone is involved. Human rights tools and instruments are very clear. Let us apply them as they are. Let's not postpone. Let's not think for other people. Let's include all of them. Lastly, I would like to bring this to human rights defenders, to the Catholic Church, and to all stakeholders watching here. Take it upon yourself to reach out to people who are marginalized. Let's work with the people most affected. Let's not work with the easiest way out. Let's see who is left out, go to them and work with them so that no one is left behind in this process. That way, we will find long-term sustainable solutions. I believe so. Thank you.
Thank you, Gitahi. I think it also brings us to another issue on human rights education. We have to work on human rights education to help the people become aware of their rights and how to form themselves into groups that can work towards protecting and defending their rights. Can you please tell me a little bit more on this human rights education?
I might start a bit.
Yes, please.
I think the same with the Claretians. We are working a lot with the GPIC network of our congregations, of our orders. And we say that within the Franciscan family, the GPIC is in our DNA. Yeah? So it is in our blood, it is in our life. And often our network misunderstood the work of GPIC as something that is a bit more pastoral, without realizing that in fact what they are doing, in fact, are the human rights work. So first of all, when we talk about human rights education, it's also to realize that many of our works, in fact, are human rights works, except that sometimes the terminology that we use are much more pastoral terminology, but not human rights terminology. So we are trying to synchronize between the understanding of pastoral work as, in fact, part of the human rights work. And Gitahi mentioned very clearly in the beginning about who are the human rights defenders. The human rights defenders are not only people with the law degree or people who work with the NGOs. We are human rights defenders because we are defending our own right, but also other people's right. So I think it's quite important to realize that in our GPIC work, we are doing human rights. However, I think we need to synchronize our brothers and sisters to understand that what we are doing, in fact, is human rights, and we need to use to refer to the international human rights norms. For example, if the road is the road to our village is very bad, for example, whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility of the people or the state? So we need to engage our brothers and sisters in the real discussion, for example, to say that, yes, it is also about human rights. It is about the access to education. I work also in this Papua, in which some pupils have to walk for about 5 kilometers to go to the nearest school, or the pregnant woman, they cannot give birth because the closest clinics or dispensary is 10 kilometers. No, it's about human rights, because by requesting the government, questioning the government why they don't provide equal access to education, equal access to health, to these people, of the indigenous people, for example. So the human rights education, of course, we can do it through different training, but I think also to help our brothers and sisters to realize that it is about our life. It is about what we are doing, in fact, which is human rights work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Kitaki, do you want to add something to what Budi said?
Budi is very able.
Yes.
But I can say that human rights education is learning that develops the knowledge, skills, and values of human rights with a broad goal of understanding a universal rights culture. It's good to know that we have a declaration on human rights education. I think I'd want to mention this. And it's a right to take human rights education to all the people. I would encourage anyone who has this opportunity to reach out to the community who really don't know about the knowledge on human rights education. Take a few minutes extra every day to take human rights education to the people, because that's how we'll end up with a critical mass of people who are aware and able to use human rights tools and mechanisms. Thank you.
So one of the issues that our viewers has shared with you is about the human rights situation in the Philippines, especially with the drug war, and then the execution of almost so many thousands of people who have been brutally killed because of their possession of drugs or being drug addicts or even pushing drugs without due process. Would you like to tell us how we have to face such situations?
Thank you very much. Magandang hapon, Kakabayan. So good.
Magandang hapon.
Everyone. Father Galisus also speak a little bit of Tagalog. So I think it is very timely also to discuss the human rights situation in the Philippines, and the situation is not improving. And with the situation of COVID, it's really, really challenging. So we've been working on the issue of the war against the war on drugs, against contesting the policy of the government on the war on drugs. Very, very closely by bringing testimonies coming from the Philippines, the mothers of the victims, or the network of the NGOs who are working on this issue to the UN to denounce the situation. And we are very glad that now we have 2 UN Human Rights Council resolutions condemning the situation in the Philippines, and now we are asking the government of the Philippines to provide a report so that they can be accountable. I think the most important thing is that the government has to be accountable to their policies, and we know that the war on drug policies has targeted mainly the poor people, the poor part of the society in the Philippines, and they are victimized, and there is the justice is not being done. Until now, if I'm not mistaken, there has been around 30,000 people who've been killed, and only a handful of cases that are brought to justice. So in terms of the human rights education, I think it's very, very important to think about the long term, because Duterte has been seen as a Hollywood hero, you know, like a Superman trying to address this issue by killing people like Rambo, etc. However, we are still very much concerned that this policy of Duterte, which is very against human rights, has received so much support coming from the people, because the people were fed up with the previous governments on how the governments were corrupt, were not addressing the issue. So I think it's very important for us really to discuss the issue, to put the issue on the table and try to discuss that the policy on war on drugs, in fact, is against human rights, that it has to be challenged. I'm very glad that the CBCB, the Catholic Bishop Conference of the Philippines, as well as the MRSP, the Association of Major Religious Bureaus of the Philippines, have made several statements and trying to oppose this policy. So the human rights education is also being done by the church institutions by challenging the policy of the government. And I do believe now that the level of the understanding of the people on the current government has improved quite a lot. And many people, especially those who are in the lowest, not the lowest, on being marginalized, being the poor people, the indigenous peoples, workers, they start to realize that this government is really the government that is undemocratic, authoritarian, and against human dignity, against human rights. And his time is clicking. 2022, normally he has to be changed. And that will be the time for the people to choose the right people, the right candidate who will defend the human rights, who will protect the human dignity.
Thank you, Budi. I would like to remind all our viewers that you are most welcome to post your questions and share your comments of the situations that you are facing in your own places. Now, this brings us actually to another issue of human rights defenders. Because I think in the Philippines, we have also experienced deaths of people who have stood up for human rights. And I would like to ask both of you actually to share your personal experience of being human rights defenders and what should the viewers take care of when they become human rights defenders. Kitaki.
Thank you. I'm very passionate about this topic. Human rights defenders are selfless people who have taken a position to reiterate and to stand for basic rights and fundamental freedoms. Unfortunately, in many cases, and I'll give the example of a few countries in Africa, as I said previously, some defenders have paid the ultimate price with their lives just for standing up for rights. There are others who have not really been killed in the line of duty, if you may, but they are living under very harsh conditions where arbitrary arrests, where criminalization of the organizations and who they are, where attacks and violations are a routine. This is a problem. And I think going back to when we had the UN Declaration for Human Rights and developing this term, human rights defender, this is not the first time we have
I think we have gone. Okay, could you please continue? You went off for a moment.
For rights. It was trying to recall these people. What do we put in place to reduce? And the activist term was. So I think that I would like to state that there are legal instruments. There are channels that we can use to defend rights. Unfortunately, in the recent past, as it were, in this continent, we have seen prominent human rights defenders in Nigeria being rounded up and charged with terrorism because they stood up against a police force that was violating its people's rights. They were killing, they were disappearing people, they were violating all manner of rights. When they stand up and went to the streets and organized people to say this is wrong, now they are being charged with terrorism. This is intimidation of the highest order, and there is no violation of human rights defenders in Guatemala, in India, in Kenya. Violation against human rights defender is a violation. We should stand up with them. They are doing the right thing. I want to mention that sanctity of life is important here. Life is sacred. Life is holy. Life is precious. Human rights defenders are trying to bring this message. We are losing lives. So the environment in which defenders should work in really needs a lot of improvement. I urge states to really adapt language that respects human rights defenders, to implement protection mechanisms that allow human rights defenders to work, and for all of us to contribute to that environment, to see that people are able to talk. If the local woman in the council, in a local market, stands up against the taxman and says, why do you collect tax and you don't sweep the market? This is a human rights defender. Let us broaden who defenders are, what they do, recognize them, and create a space that people address issues raised by human rights defenders, not attack defenders themselves. And we can work together on this. Everyone can come on board. There is always room for contribution to see that defenders are safe and protected. If in the event you find displaced human rights defenders, people who are displaced from their own regions, countries, continents, because they stood up for the truth, let us not treat these people as refugees without names. These are courageous people who stood up strongly for rights. Let us give them a name and say, this is person so-and-so who stood up for these rights, because it is for such people that we enjoy rights, that we shall continue enjoying rights. Let us make it easier for human rights defenders. Thank you.
That is a wonderful invitation to all our viewers to also to care for people who are working in this field of human rights, and we all have to work in the field of human rights. I know, Budi, as a student activist, you have already experienced this situation of being observed, being harassed, you being going through all the difficulties a human rights defender goes through today. Could you share with us your personal experience?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I think when we work for human rights, there is always this risk and excitement of being observed, being, targeted as someone who is against the government. In fact, we need to really make people and also people in the government to understand that what we are doing is not against the government. We are working to defend human rights, the human rights of the people. We defend the rights and the dignity of people. Me in 1997 and 1990s, until the end, almost the end 1990s, I was very much active in protesting against the dictatorship. We went down the streets doing the protest, and the peak was in 1998, in which the students were very much involved in fighting against the corrupt government, the government that was very much against human rights. And some of our colleagues were shot dead in front of us. Some of them were made disappeared, and we don't know their whereabouts until now. And when I was on the street, for example, we were really face to face with the military. And we also saw some snipers from certain buildings. And I myself, I saw someone who was shot dead when I was in Jakarta in 1998. And we took that risk. Why we took that risk? Because we defend something. No? When we were young or less young, we are convinced that what we are doing is for the people. For the people means for ourselves, for the dignity of the people. That what we are fighting is fighting for something that is true. And until now, for example, I'm working on several human rights situations in the Philippines, in Sri Lanka. Some of them are from Sri Lanka, and you know how the situation of the human rights defenders in Sri Lanka. You just escaped from a very long dictatorship with a little bit of pause, and now you're coming back to that regime. And as we know very well now, the human rights defenders in Sri Lanka are at high risk, and some of them are self-censoring because of the fear of their life. So we need to support this example. That we need to encourage people to work, although we need to calculate as well on how to protect ourselves, because it's very important also to protect ourselves. If we are killed, of course, we are seed that people will grow and defend it at the same time, but we need also to be quite strategic to calculate on how to to defend, to be human rights defenders, defending the people's right, but at the same time trying to be a bit more sustainable, not being killed or whatever. And I also I'm also very much aware in the Philippines, for example, the issue what Kitahi mentioned about being labeled as terrorists has been used until now. It's being used now. Many religious leaders, either Protestants or Catholic or human rights defenders, are red tag. So it means that if you are very vocal, you're communist, you're terrorist. No? And many of them, they have sacrificed their life. How many Catholic priests that were shot dead? How many Protestant ministers or reverends that have been shot dead? Why? Because they are defending their rights. Peasants, human rights, indigenous leaders, they really, as what Kita said, they sacrifice themselves. They pay the highest price. But I think we need to continue because I think it's very important. Being human rights defender is also living our conviction. So I think that's very important that we live our conviction, and it is our call to live that conviction, regardless of the price sometimes. But I think we need to continue, and we need to inspire people so that people will not be silent only because of the threat coming from the government, the military, or others. Yeah.
Thank you, Budi. I think Kitaki told that we have to give them a name for all our defenders. And recently we have been also hearing about Father Staniswami in India, who had been arrested in his very old age as he was working with the indigenous people and wanted to protect the rights of land, their rights for land. And so we have to give them a name and stand by them. There's a question from one of our viewers regarding hunger, situation of hunger that is caused by COVID-19. We know that right to food is also a basic human rights, one of the basic human rights. And is there any information about the situation of hunger in the world that is caused by COVID? And is there mechanisms that are put in place to address this situation? Can any one of you enlighten our viewers on that? Yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead,
Itai, please.
Thank you. Indeed, COVID-19 is a pandemic that really has exposed the world to experiences never thought of that we would be here. And we hope that we shall overcome, all of us, soon. It's not easy. It's difficult. I would like to highlight a few things that I have observed. One, during or the initial stages of the lockdown, and all that manner of thing. And in that time, there was a period where in some countries in Africa, more people were killed by the police enforcing COVID regulations than COVID at that particular time. So I cannot look at COVID-19 and hunger in isolation. I have to look at it in totality of how human rights becomes then again a measure for us to approach on how this is dealt with. I agree with you that we have a right to food, and food security is a topic to be discussed as a human rights issue. Are people able to produce their own food and consume enough? And I think there is a general question that comes up when you talk about that indigenous people and local communities are refusing mining companies, are refusing development companies to come and bring development to them. I'm usually asking a question: how come these companies are not owned by those indigenous people? How come they have to come from outside and help indigenous people? Why I ask this question is I know that there is a capitalist approach to development that favors the people with money, the corporates, more than the people with the land. And there is a way that people live. If you look at pastoristic communities in the world, they have a system where they move from one point, go for grazing, and then come back after some time, and that system sustains their own environment and food security. COVID-19 has brought this exposure of government, and I would dare say even development agencies in the UN, not being responsive, not having mechanisms to reach people where they are. I'm very concerned by the conversation in the world now that there's a vaccine for COVID-19. I was listening to Dr. Fauci when he was appointed recently by Biden, president-elect. Fauci in his speech said, we are sure in the next few weeks, we shall have good distribution in the US and the UK. This is for the vaccine of COVID-19. And I'm there wondering, I'm in Kenya, I'm in rural Kenya. How do I matter? How do I access? How am I, what is my space in being a global citizen when it comes to food, when it comes to vaccinations, when it comes to be considered equally? I know it's a challenge to distribute, but I think the language needs to change, saying, how do we distribute this to humanity? How do we cushion all of us? I think that's the approach I would rather encourage.
Thank you very much. Actually, it brings actually few issues to mind about this concept of land and private property in the Western world is totally different from that of Africa and most of the indigenous groups in Asia. We have a communal approach to land, whereas in Western world, it is about private property. And so the interpretation of this right for land is totally different from continent to continent. And so we have to help the people to protect their values, at the same time to encourage them to also stand together so that their communal concept of land is not lost. And one of the basic issues that is being spoken today in Africa is about the land grabbing from multinationals as well as from nations like China, for example. They say that some 23% of the land in Africa is already in the control of China. How do we protect the indigenous people from such land grabs is one of the questions that perhaps will lead us to deeper reflection. The other side is what you just raised about healthcare for the poor. What right do the poor have for healthcare? I think COVID has exposed the situation of the world today in such a way that we come to recognize that only the wealthy and the rich have this possibility of healthcare, whereas the poor do not. How do we address this issue is the most important question. How do we address them? Because the theme of this day already is about a better recovery with defense of human rights. The UN is already thinking about a recovery that will happen through the basis of human rights. So can you please tell us on what the human rights agencies are trying to do today to defend this right for land or right for healthcare? Yes, Budi.
I think first on the issue of hunger or the issue of right to food, it is true that because of COVID, there has been some concrete examples on how people are affected. I live in Geneva. It's one of the richest cities in the world. But there is also the other side. During the COVID, the numbers of people who didn't have access to food were thousands. And I'm talking really about thousands. There is distribution of food for those who are in the most marginalized part of the society, even in Geneva. So there were more than, I don't know, tens of thousands of people who were helped by either the city or the churches or other organizations, because they also have the issue of hunger. Because in fact, the capitalist system, as what we discussed, has put always the weakest in the most marginalized. And when incidents or tragedy happens like that, they are the ones who are most affected. So it is a challenge. Indeed, the challenge in the developing world, if we can say that in that way, is much bigger because it's more widespread. But in fact, it is a challenge to expose the vulnerability of the system that we are adopting now, that the system in itself is not just, it's unjust system. Regarding the recovery, I think the UN has, the UN Secretary General has mentioned about building better, or that sort of terminology.
Better
of course,
recovery.
Better recovery. Of course, we agree with that. But I think this one should not remain only as a slogan. There is a big opportunity for the decision makers, especially at the national level, to re-see again their policy, their policy on how to fulfill the rights of the people in all sectors, about the food, about health, etc. Currently, when you're asking about the UN human rights mechanism, for example, many special, there is a study now being done by several UN mechanisms, like the UN special procedures, for example. They get the examples coming from different communities, also using different angles: right to health, right to food, right to healthy environment, women's rights, children's rights. Now they are still in the process of trying to gather as much as possible and trying to offer what the government should do in terms of adapting their policy to address this issue. It's a $1 million question, because what we know is that we have the opportunity. We do have the opportunity. Unfortunately, I have to be very frank. When we talk about the opportunity, it is also used by the business as an opportunity to gain more. We discussed about the vaccine. Vaccine is a huge business for them. It's a business opportunity. For those who live in Asia, you know that during this pandemic, how many made in China things that are being produced now? The shield, the mask, the air, everything is made in China. So it's a kind of business opportunity. Of course, we need protections. But many businesses are using this pandemic as an opportunity for them to gain something, which I think it's ethically wrong. So I think we have to question again. This is ethically wrong, because you have the suffering of the people, but use it as a business opportunity. And I think it is the task for us, the human rights defenders, but also the task of us as the church leaders or people being involved in the justice and peace work within the church network, to question this one again, that no, it should be based on the respect of human dignity and human rights. It's not very easy for the recovery. I think it's the question of everyone, but I think we need to push, because at the end of the day, the decision makers have to be pushed to be reminded on their obligation, because they are serving us.
Thank you very much. I just want to tell both the panelists that there have been many comments that we have been receiving, appreciating your contribution in making the viewers aware of global issues, and for your open and generous answers. One of the questions that has come up just now is about democracy. I will just read the question as it is. In democracy, which is the rule of the majority, there is always threats to the rights of the minority. How do you see
it? Very broad, this one. I think back to my introduction, Callista's on this. I think I said that rights for all people all the time, not some rights for some people sometime. Whichever way we choose to live, we cannot cherry pick rights and say these people deserve these rights, those deserve those rights and those don't deserve. We do not have that luxury of saying who has rights, who does not. Everyone has rights, everyone has dignity. And I want to give examples to demonstrate why, again, we should rally people to work with human rights defenders. Actually, two examples. In Kenya, we lost Father Kaisa, a father who stood up for rights and was saying, the way we are managing land is not cognizant of rights holders, indigenous owners of those lands, and it may affect food security in the future. Speaking that against power, talking truth to power, people who are wielding power at that time, exposed him, and he definitely lost his life. The second example is most recent, Father Ludovic in Cameroon, doing routine work, just going to visit people in rural villages, in marginalized people, preaching, talking to people. But because the state is so unjust and biased against some people in that country, he was arrested. He's doing political related work, which was not correct. I'm demonstrating what was said in that question, that some people, even in democratic countries, will not be enjoying rights. And I had also mentioned that we need to start with the most affected people when you're talking about human rights, not the most comfortable. Go to the people who are underprivileged, stand with them, and make sure that we are working towards a solution together. So in democracies, I support democratic processes, but that democracy has to stand up for the rights of its people. Democracy is the process of making decisions. Once that decision is made, there should be then a democratic letter and spirit of protecting each and every person within the parameters of that state. It is the role of then non-state actors, including the UN, the church, civil society in general, to check state and raise issues of concern where the minorities are not well protected, not well served by those democratic systems. I may wish to bring here the topic of sexual minorities. In many countries of this world, you find that people justify violations against sexual minorities because either the law does not recognize them or for personal discrimination. I think we need to state categorically, no human being should be subjected to violations. No human being should be subjected to abuse. There is no reason for that. There is no reason to attack people either for who they are or where they are or because of their numbers, that they are few. Let us uphold the approach of each person is a human being. Who are you to judge otherwise? Who are you to take violent actions because of your own beliefs? You attack another person. We need to have this conversation where minorities are and belong to this world. And we protect them, put measures, and where state fails, let us stand up as human rights defenders, as the church, as the UN, to stand up with those people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding our responsibility towards the minorities and the people in the margins, and also to take up this leadership as UN, as church, as civic society, to confront the governments and ask for accountability from them on governing the whole people. Budi, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, on the issue of democracy, I think democracy is so far the best system that we have, unfortunately, but democracy has some weaknesses. And I think in reality, some of the people, I mean, there are examples in some countries in which the majority is really pushing their views to the minority. I come from Indonesia, so I come from a place in which I belong to the religious minority as a Catholic, so I can understand that question quite well. And I think in many other countries, you can be the sexual minority, you can be ethnic minority, you can be different types of minority. But I think in terms of the democracy, what is quite important in my view is the importance of rule of law. So I think it's very important to first have the good legal system, and that legal system, since the legal system has to be based on the equality of everyone, respect on human rights. So if we have a good legal system, then the law enforcement should follow. And if we have the good law enforcement, then there should not be any difference between those who belong to the majority or those who belong to the minority. So it should be in that way. The rule of law is a key. Of course, the implementation is not very easy, but I think that is the principle of democracy, the importance of rule of law. Yeah.
Thank you, Budi. There was also another question coming from one of our viewers asking, what more can organizations working for human rights do to take up issues of Father Stan Swami, for example, when they are actually harassed for doing what is right? Is there a possibility of networking, making this international, and how to do it? I think it will answer also on networking. Could you please enlighten how to network on human rights issues?
Perhaps I can start and then we will see. At the UN, there is a mechanism of complaint mechanism, or what we call sometimes also is a communication mechanism, in which if we see human rights violations, like the case of Father Swami, we can write an appeal to the UN expert that we call as a special rapporteurs or a similar expert, in which we can provide all the information regarding the case. And it has to be first-hand information. It has to get the consent of the family or the organization that works with Father Swami in this case. And then that communication can be sent to a special rapporteur. If Father Swami was killed, we can send it to different mechanisms such as the human rights defenders, the extrajudicial killings. If he defended the right to land, for example, we can also send it to the issue of the working group on peace and human rights. So there are several mechanisms in which we can communicate on the case. And then those communication normally should be taken by the special rapporteur, and then they will send a letter to the state, the concerned state, in this case, India, questioning on the process. By sending a question to the Indian government, and then the Indian government has to provide answer. This is about accountability. No? And then there should be a process of understanding on what the situation is. And the letters coming from the special rapporteurs will constitute as international pressure so that India is accountable to what they do. And of course, we should not give any false hope to the victims, because the UN is not a supra government. UN is not the human rights court. It is not. So we have to understand, UN is a political body in which it provides pressure to the government. So in terms of real justice, it has to be done at the national level, because UN cannot take any judicial decision on that. So that sort of pressure coming from the UN will be very useful in terms of trying to expose the situation at the international level, which provide pressure to the case of Father Swami. And then it can be done by anyone, by the church organization, by the NGOs, by a group of civil society, etc. Yeah, that's my.
Thank you. I think that is very useful information. Kitaki?
I wish, first of all, to condemn violations against any human rights defender anywhere. people who stand for rights are raising issues that we should address, issues of concern on human rights. And attacking them does not solve issues. Sometimes it escalates. But I think the question was more towards what we can do, and I think Budi explained very well, have mechanisms, complaint mechanisms, structure within the UN where the state has failed.
I think again you have Kitaki has gone. Okay, please.
Of responding to human rights defenders. We need to develop structures to stand up with each other. We need to have responsive mechanisms, not only to remove defenders at risk from where they are, but to go to where defenders are and expand that working environment. I think that what we have in place now is not conclusive, is not enough, because we see attacks are continuing, defamation is continuing. Let us all document this. Let us not isolate each other. Just because I am a human rights defender in Kenya does not mean that people in Chile, people in Germany should not care about the work I'm doing. And I should also care about people in India, people in Sri Lanka, people in Thailand. People who are standing in the streets talking truth to power. Let us remove borders on this issue. Let us build solidarity, but it should be timely, responsive, and action-oriented, not rhetoric that we want to stand for rights. So there's still more to do. I appreciate people who are already building into protection of human rights defenders.
I think it's a very good advice. Documentation is very important. Building network is also very important. Today we are living in a global world where we are connected with one another, and information passes very fast, and we can really spread the information and create this network also in defense of human rights defenders. I just would like to remind all our viewers that we have another 20 minutes for this discussion, this conversation on human rights. And if you have any other questions other than what you have already posed, please continue to post your questions and your comments as we continue our conversation. One of the issues perhaps that we could share with the viewers is about both of you have been involved in human rights issues. Especially Budi, you have been attending also the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And I just would like to ask you to enlighten our viewers on some of the urgent issues that had not been attended to by the rest of the humanity. Are there issues that will need our support, our solidarity at this moment? And could you enlighten one or two of such issues that you think that is urgent but had not been attended to?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It is very interesting indeed to see that the human right, there is proliferations of the human rights issues in which the different human rights issues have come up here and there in trying to be addressed by different mechanisms. I think we were discussing a little bit on the issue of the climate justice, environmental justice, etc. And I think one of the issues that has not been very much discussed is the right of the future generation. I think it's very important because it is very relevant to the climate crisis at the moment. We discuss about the issue of climate change, climate justice, climate and environment from what's happening now. But I think we need to also use more and more the human rights of the future generation. Because when we talk about the climate justice, we are not talking only about in the next 10, 15 years, but we are talking about 100 years in the future. If finally we cannot reverse back the climate tendency now, so it means whatever we are doing, we will be the 6th biggest extinction. No? We are walking against the wall. So I think it's very important to discuss about the right of the future generation, which entails so many things. But first of all, we can use the window of the issue of climate change as a way for us to ensure the right of the next generation or the next generations. Because without addressing, without thinking in our mind that we have the obligation, it's stewardship of our generations toward the future generation. And it's also very much in line with the Laudato Si encyclical, not thinking about the future. So I think we can work on that issue, and we think that we have the responsibility on that.
Thank you, Budi. I would like to pose this question to Gitaki. The question is as follows. In the context of legal system being politicized, obtaining justice becoming expensive, and the voices of the church and civil society groups are ignored, what is the best approach for citizens to protect their rights?
I wish I could answer with one question: civil disobedience.
Civil disobedience. Wonderful. Thank you. Can you please explain a little bit about this right for civil disobedience?
Yes. We have law and order to have kind of organized societies. But if you have elections, that is a tool of democratic process, where some people are denied to exercise that right. The opposition zone does not get the ballot boxes, or they get 1 hour to closing time, or populations don't have the requisite documents to vote. They have not exercised their right of choice. They will not be satisfied. Sometimes we are getting governments that are not representative of the people. And you see some of them making laws to target certain individuals or communities, or to give them more power, you know. In those circumstances, we as human beings who are affected have several options. We need to organize, and we can use, as we were told by Budi, complaint mechanisms of the UN. However, there are other ways of dealing with this. Issues of protest. We have rights to protest and picket. In Africa, this right has been taken away from us way too long. When people come out to protest on an issue, you see police with live bullets, police with tear gas, police with batons, police targeting leaders who are organizing. We've seen this in Thailand. It's happening in Thailand now. We've seen this in Hong Kong. It's a global problem. So what we need to do, in my opinion, towards very effective civil disobedience, which I really support, is make sure that all rights are respected, including freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of thought. I'm allowed to have all this. Once we protect the basic rights and freedoms, then we can address that question where laws are not working. Okay? That the states either using laws wrongfully, making bad laws. I gave the example of Nigeria using the anti-terror law to attack human rights defenders. We need to protect and build on those rights, and not in one country. This is a global issue. This is an issue of urgency. We have the Rohingya people who are being removed from their homeland. The globe is watching, and that is a good example. What do we do? It concerns me from Nairobi that these people should have their rights. They should be in their homes. They should be doing whatever it is that they want to be doing. So, beyond building structures that help us with civil disobedience, I would say globalization of rights.
Globalization of rights. Yeah.
ANC in South Africa was really helped by globalization of rights of black people who are fighting apartheid. It's not an issue of me in Nairobi in Kenya. It's our issue as human beings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it also answers another question that came in about the governments not taking care of the grassroots issues, but only voicing their support, but not doing what they are promising. It brings us actually to another important aspect of human rights. About this human right mechanism, actually at the beginning we spoke about the Paris Agreement, but there are also other human rights tools and instruments that can be used in the work of protecting and defending human rights. Could you, both of you, say a few of these things and how practical they are, and what are the practical things that the viewers can begin with?
Perhaps I can start very briefly. There are so many mechanisms, and it's impossible for us to use all mechanisms.
Yeah.
We are not superwoman or superman. So as organizations, we have to limit ourselves to the few things that we can do with our community, with our GPICs, with our organizations. So for us, for example, in the Franciscan International, we do use several mechanisms. One of the mechanisms that we have been using quite a lot is the Universal Periodic Review. Universal Periodic Review is a mechanism at the UN Human Rights Council in which all states, all member states of the United Nations are being reviewed regularly every 4.5 years. So all states, without exception. And this mechanism is, in our estimation, is quite easy to follow, in which any organizations can make a submission, in which the submission should be submissions regarding the human rights situations, especially how a state implement their international obligations in terms of human rights. So say, for example, I will give you a concrete example on what we did just a few months ago on the issue of the human rights situation in Solomon Islands. We are working with the Anglican Franciscan in Solomon Island, and we have a discussion with them and trying to ask them what are the human rights issues that they are facing. So it should be something concrete which our network is working on. So they are mentioning on the issue of the impact of deforestation in Solomon Island. So from the issue of deforestation, for example, we can break down into several issues. First is what is the impact of deforestation in terms of the right to water, the right to food, the issue of climate change. And then we are trying to collect the information from them by providing them some guiding questions. So we provide them with guiding questions. For example, the guiding questions is how is the legislations in terms of deforestation? What is the impact of logging on the access to water? What is the impact of logging on the access to right to food? So they provide all these informations, and then we gather these informations and we try to transform the language of our partners into the language of human rights. For example, on the issue of the right to food, and then we see what are the international norms on the issue of the right to food. And then we also transfer the issue of right to healthy environment, for example, or the issue of climate change. What are the impacts of deforestation on climate change? For example, access to food in terms of access to their capacity to get the food from the sea, for example. They provided some information regarding how difficult now for them to do their fishing activities in comparison with before the deforestation. So there are certain information that we receive, and then we process it, and then we submit it to the UN. And for the UN, when Solomon Island will be reviewed, they will consider our report as part of the information in the discussion. So the UPR is a mechanism that is not very difficult to use. it is very periodic, every 4.5 years, and all states will be reviewed. And all the informations are available in online. And by the end of the process, there will be a recommendation. And from these recommendations, we can again monitor on how these recommendations are implemented by the state, and also adding some new situation. So this is one of the mechanisms in which I will encourage you all to use.
Thank you very much, Budi. Kitaki?
I agree with Budi. I agree with Budi that UPR is a good mechanism, and why we have that mechanism is because it's voluntary. States talk about their human rights situation, they're given recommendations, and they are supposed to implement and therefore over time improve the situation of human rights. In Africa, we have the Africa Commission for Human and People's Rights, and we also have interstate peer review mechanisms. I think the only thing I want to comment is we should stop making rhetoric of these things. They should resort of rights in the implement. When a recommendation is done, the state that will announce, and then
that's true. And one of the questions that has come in just now is, how sincere do you see the powerful countries protecting human rights? Do they speak only for their political gain, or are they committed to the human rights that they speak of?
Yes. You live in Germany, right?
Yes, I do.
So I would really want to use that as an example.
Yes.
State officials in Germany, civil servants, committed to human rights. I don't understand when they are the same officials who give licenses to their extractive companies to come to Kenya, and in that process of business, commit violations. I don't get it, because yes, this is someone who understands, protects human rights, but on the other hand is blind to areas where people very close to them go and commit violations in other countries. And we have a problem with mining and those extractive industries. That is one example.
Garment industry, there are many issues. You are correct. Yeah.
So I want to see more of them. As people say they are funding development world, you're funding Kenya to dig boreholes, build bridges, make sure that the human rights voices are being addressed. We would rather stop that development for now and protect rights. Let's not have a very biased position when it comes to human rights, because it may demonstrate white supremacists, it may demonstrate wrongful use of power, racism, ethnicity, and all those things. Let's have equity in approach to human rights and development.
Thank you. I think it's a very hot issue today in Europe and in the Western world, where some of these norms have been twisted and flexed because of the economic system that we are living in. So they say that we respect the rule of the law and the rights of the people in the country, and we have different rights than the people in the countries where we are investing. So this is the defense that is being used, but we have to fight and protect the rights of all the people. Another question that has come up a couple of times here is about arbitrary detentions. How can this be prevented?
Well, it's not very easy to prevent because it's arbitrary. That's the issue, because the state actors, arbitrary detention normally is done by the state actors, by the state apparatus against us. against many of the times against human rights defenders or indigenous leaders or student activists, etc. So it's very, very difficult. And I think I still remember the concrete case of Ruki and Father, what is the other name? In Sri Lanka, I remember when in Sri Lanka, our colleague, some of you might know him quite well, when Rukshan Fernando Ruki, our dear friend, was arrested, arbitrarily detained. What we did was just immediately we made international campaign against this arbitrary detention. And thanks God, because of the international pressure, and finally within 3 days, he was released, or they were released because there were 2 persons who were detained. Well, Ruki is known, but unfortunately there are so many unknown people who are, so that's why I think the issue of naming the human rights defender is very important. So there are so many human rights defenders which might not be known internationally that are being detained by the government, by either the military or the government. So it is very important to do a worldwide campaign when that case of arbitrary detention is taking place. Say for example, for us, we are working on the issue of the human rights situation in West Papua. One point about a few weeks ago, there were a public hearing of the Papuan People's Council. It's an official organization because they were discussing a very hot issue. The police arrested them and detained them arbitrarily for a night. So we cried in terms of shouting at the international level, contacting the government and trying to make that issue very visible. And finally, because of different reasons, not only because of us, because of different reasons, they were released. Because we said that what they are doing is wrong. So I think the immediate reaction by doing a campaign or making noise at different level might prevent a prolonged arbitrary detention.
Thank you for that. I think actually as we come close to our time, there's another request to help us with this monitoring and documentation. If you can give few points, few tips actually to our viewers on how to do documentation and monitoring, it will help them.
Thank you. I can take this one. This is a process we use to continuously, over time, demonstrate the situation of a certain topic of human rights in a context. So monitoring is keeping, being on the lookout of violations happening, putting them into writing, that is a documentation, and then addressing them to channels that can respond to the violations. How this is helpful is because we do face political violence where certain groups of people, where certain individuals are deliberately targeted over time, sometimes by state actors, and monitoring, documentation, and reporting process helps us show this. So there are principles that we can improve skills about that, where this then reports on showing this is systemic. I can give you an example. I like using examples, Christas. In the case of Chile, General Pinochet, was all over the world saying nothing is happening in Chile. But it is that process of continuously monitoring and documenting despite the circumstances that finally exposed the truth, that finally brought justice, that finally gave victims a voice. So I encourage people who mostly are in very hostile environments, and these are very many countries in the world, unfortunately now, even if you cannot take action at this point, document what happened, what day, to who is the perpetrator, how are they connected, what are they using, so that when time comes, and time will come, I usually say in the fullness of time, justice will be served. So even if people feel isolated now, in any way. You don't have to write it down. In any way that you can recall, document, and do it over time. So this is the concept of monitoring, documenting, and reporting. It will be useful for victims. It will be useful for justice. Hope that helps the question.
Thank you. We have approached the time, and I would like to thank both of you for your generous time, for your very detailed answers, and then actually evoking an interest actually to work on these issues of human rights in the places where we are, and giving us also some tips on how to start if we have not yet. And then, as Budi was telling, how to use human rights language to the pastoral work that we are doing in many parts of the world today. I would like to thank you for your generous time, for your sharing of your experience and expertise with the viewers. I would like to thank all the viewers who have taken this time on this Human Rights Day to think, reflect, learn about human rights. And I would like to thank our CLARETIAN UN team, especially Father Rohan, Father Vincent, and Father Paulus, who have been working behind the scene actually to make this happen. And I wish all of you a happy day. As I think actually to end, I would like to use this quotation of Pope Francis again. We have to return to normal soon, but he says not to the same normal. We have to return to a normal that will take care of the rights of the people. And with that word, I would like to hand over to Rohan. Thank you.
Rohan, you're muted, sorry.
So we are at the end of the this beautiful conversation on this Human Rights Day 2020 and the live chat event in YouTube channel. Just 120 minutes is not enough to speak about the human rights situation in the world. There were many questions and many comments, but we are unable to discuss everything in this short time. But this nearly 120 minutes goes so fast. It's go very lively. Although we know that the word human rights is a bad word, a banned word in the world. Many of the leaders are, and many of the governments are allergic to hear this word, human rights. And we are still in this world, we are trying to live a harmonious life. It's because of the efforts of the human rights activists and defenders. Despite many intimidation and threats, they carry on this work of human rights action in many countries. So we are thankful to all the human rights activists, defenders, those who are protecting, promoting human rights in different ways in different parts of the world. And this is the day to thank them for their enormous work that they are doing for us to live happily in this world and to hope for a better world tomorrow. During this short time of 2 hours, we have covered so much areas, so much conversation. We had we have discussed on human rights situation in different parts of the world. We had spoken about human rights education, about the human rights defenders, right to life, right to food, COVID recovery, vaccination, democracy, civil disobedience, so much we have spoken in this short time. I'm thankful to the panelists, Budi and Gitahi. They are experienced human rights activists, defenders. They have long years of experience in the field. Their experience and knowledge had really helped us to know more about the human rights situation, and it has impelled us to work for human rights action. So I'm thankful to both of you, Gitahi and Budi, for giving your time for us. And especially Budi now is in few minutes, he has to fly to another place. And when I requested both of you, you have kindly accepted our invitation and sharing your knowledge and experience with all of us and inspiring us all to go on in this difficult but enjoying task of working for human rights. And I'm also thankful to my companion, Callistus Joseph. Actually, we were both studied together, and we have the same passion for human rights and activism. And in spite of many schedules, as a provincial, he accepted our invitation and excellently moderating this session. His handling of this session was really remarkable. Within this short 2 hours, he had invited the panelists to speak on various subjects. So I'm thankful to Joseph for giving your time for us and helping us in this conversation. Also thankful to Vincent and Paulus, who are helping us through our logistics, and also all the viewers from all over the globe, from Australia to United States. There are many communities also participating in this event. I just want to conclude reminding the objectives that we had for this event. The first one was to increase the level of awareness and knowledge and understanding on human rights among the people. Secondly, to get involved in human rights action. And thirdly, to commit for the protection and promotion of human rights wherever we live and serve. And fourthly, to build solidarity and create networking. I hope this 120 minutes event had achieved all these things. We have increased our level of knowledge through our panelists. I hope we are inspired to involve in human rights action, and also to protect and promote human rights, and also to promote human rights education every day in all our activities in pastoral work too. And the most important thing is to build solidarity and networking. I hope this event would help us to create that networking and solidarity among us, to help each other, so that we can not only vision a better world, but also one day we can live and experience that better world. Thank you for participating, and thank you for this good and fruitful conversation for 120 minutes. Thank you. All the best to you all. And let us continue to promote and protect human rights.
Thank you, all of you. Bye-bye.
We'll